Are you a good test taker? Tell me, are you good at taking tests? Do you look forward to taking tests? Uh, when you were a kid, like, did your grades get better because of the tests, or did they get worse because of the tests? For me, if I wasn't a good test taker, I might not have made it out of high school. I was the fourth kid, and I just never did homework, and nobody really ever told me to do homework. There was always this, oh, it was sort of a difficult day every time I'd bring home the report card, and every single one of my teachers would put needs improvement on homework. The reason why I needed improvement because I didn't do any of it. I just never did homework ever. Partly because I was a good test taker. I like test taking. There's something about like sports and test taking, so I got into it. My greatest test taking moment was this. It was my sophomore year of college, and this was probably the worst academic semester of my entire life. Things were really difficult for my family at the time, and I was a bit of a mess. Ironically, that was the very semester where I came to faith, and I was figuring so many things out, and school was just at the bottom. Well, I had taken geography, and this was the kind of professor that just kind of taught from the textbook, and I didn't do much with it. In fact, I don't think I really ever went to the class. But the final came up, and I was going to cram the last day for the final, but I just wasn't feeling very well. And so my cramming didn't go well, and I ended up falling asleep and waking up, going to the exam, and I started getting this unbelievable fever. Like I started shaking, and I had a hard time with like filling in the dots because my hands were shaking. I had chills, I was sweating, I was breaking out in this unbelievable fever. It's the kind of thing that people would run away from me today. But I had this awful, awful fever, and I finished the exam, and I went home and I crashed and I slept. I got some sort of fever, flu, whatever it was, but I was sick and it was terrible. And I hadn't done anything in that class. That exam represented everything. But when I went over to Newark Hall to find out my grade, I couldn't believe it. I got an A minus for the class. I had no idea what I did on the exam. I got an A minus for the class. That was awesome. Calculus, on the other hand, not so much. See, calculus, you kind of have to do the work. And I barely got through calculus. I ended up taking calculus again because I wasn't able to pass that test. When I talk about tests, does it invigorate you? What do you think about it? Because today we need to talk about tests and the kind of tests that we experience, particularly when it comes to our faith. God says in the book of James that the testing of our faith produces perseverance. And perseverance must finish its work so that we might be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Tests move us forward. The test made it really, really clear that I wasn't ready when it came to calculus. I needed to learn more. I'm doing fine on geography. I'm fine on geography. Calculus, I needed more. We're facing real tests right now when it comes to our faith. And today we're going to talk about specific tests when it comes to our relationship with God and how God uses tests to grow us. In particular, we're going to tell a story. And this is a great story. You've heard the story before. We're going to tell a story about what happens when somebody tests Jesus. He flips it around and puts a test on them. We're finishing up our series today called We Flourish. The theme of our series has been is a verse written to exiles. Israel's living in a foreign land. Seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have called you. Because as that city prospers, so shall you. And for us, all of us, everybody in this world now is living in a new world. Whether it's new technological realities, new financial realities, new medical realities, health, so many things are new and it feels different. But we can flourish. We can prosper. Last week we talked about how we can continue to flourish materially. That God's taking care of us is a part of the deal. And we can count on that. Just like any parent would want to take care of their kids, we are God's children. He's going to take care of us. Today we're going to talk about how He's not just taking care of us, but He's taking care of everyone. but that's a bit of a test for us. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a story from Luke chapter 10. We've been talking about dynamics of the exile. Well, we're going to be talking about some latent dynamics of the exile, because we're going to be talking about Jews and Samaritans. The Samaritans emerged out of the first exile from Israel. And there became a lot of animosity between Jews and Samaritans. I'm going to pick it up in Luke chapter 10. You can follow along with me if you have a Bible or on the screen in front of you. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbors yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expenses you may have." Jesus replied, "Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The expert of the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." And Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." Financial abundance and financial loss, they're tests. And it's not just a test to your specific faith when you have abundance or loss. It could almost be more of a test when somebody else has abundance or somebody else has loss. In fact, what I'm going to particularly talk about today is how the vulnerable become a test to your faith and my faith. Well, let's start with the lawyer. The lawyer came to test Jesus. And Jesus was so popular. He was so influential. And those who had influence were threatened by him. So this guy was sharp, and he was going to test Jesus. And he comes to Jesus and said, "Okay, what's the most important law?" And Jesus spins around and turns it on him and says, "Well, what do you think?" And he answers Jesus' answer really well. Jesus says, "Do this. You got it. Here, A+. Now go do it, and you'll be fine." The man realized, though, loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, loving your neighbors yourself, man, there's got to be some boundaries to that. It's so big. How do you do that? And so he wanted to justify himself. And let's just pause there and say, if you want to wreck your spiritual life, if you want to ruin your relationship with God, if you want to slow things down and go in reverse, start coming up with ways to justify yourself. It's almost always the wrong thing. At the heart of the Christian faith is that Jesus died the death that you were supposed to die, and he lived the life you were supposed to live, and he has risen from the dead to overcome all of that. And your justification isn't in what you've done. It's in what Jesus has done. And if that is news to you, well, man, there's so much better news for you to learn along the way. But if you don't like that, if you want sort of your goodness or morality to be your justification, chances are that's gonna come up against your Christian faith along the way. Well, so he wanted to justify himself. But what he wanted to do, he's like, all right, can we just narrow this thing down to something I can accomplish, right? Because, like, who really is my neighbor? He says, Jesus, well, who is my neighbor? And the idea, and Pharisees would do this all the time, and sometimes pastors today, what they'll do is they'll break the law down into something you could do. Because here's the thing, if he could do this, he could say, God, I did your rules, now you owe me a good life. I did your rules, now you owe me a good life. And Jesus is not going to get trapped into that. And so he tells a story, and he's going to test him. And in that test, there's going to be some tests for us along the way. He tells the story of this man who hit all these hard times and needed some pity. He needed some compassion. And it tested his faith. It's going to test ours as well. So the first test is this. It's the test of compassion. If you know the story, what you need to understand is this man, he was really foolish. Yet he had gotten beaten up by robbers. He'd got knocked around. He'd got all his stuff stolen, and he was laying there half dead. And yes, man, that's an awful thing to happen to anyone. But here's the thing. He was walking on the Jericho road by himself. It's a dangerous place. You don't do that by yourself. You don't do that without protection, and you certainly don't do it with any kind of wealth to tempt robbers to come out of the cracks in the valleys to come attack you. And he was foolish. He shouldn't have done it. He shouldn't have done it. And a lot of times when it comes to compassion, we think we have some folks have actually articulated that there's something known as the deserving poor, the wise poor, or the poor that have tried a little bit harder. But there's this assumption when you start talking about a deserving poor and an undeserving poor that there is those that, and maybe us, we're the ones who deserve abundance. And once you start talking about deserving poor and those who don't deserve it, we begin losing track of who we are, at least in God's eyes. To the Israelites, when they were moving, they were just about to enjoy the land that God was going to give them. Moses told them, he said, watch yourself when you move into the land. He said, you might say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth. Yes, he was foolish. Yes, he made a mistake. All of us have been foolish. All of us have made mistakes. Sometimes thoughts like this and thoughts of superiority like this, make us think that we don't have to show compassion because they don't deserve it. But also sometimes when we're the ones who need compassion, we tell the same story to ourselves. We say, I deserve this. I've made a mistake and I need pity, I need compassion from somebody else, and I don't really deserve this. And it keeps us from the grace that God would want to show us. So you have this man, he's lying on by the side of the road, and yeah, he made some mistakes. But good news, there's some spiritual leaders coming along, a priest comes along, and then a Levite comes along who's like sort of an assistant to a priest. And each of them decide to go on the other side of the road. Why? The reason why is that this man was half dead, which means that at any point he could become whole dead, which if he was whole dead, they're not allowed to touch a corpse, and then they wouldn't be able to do their job. They were afraid that if they went and helped that guy, they would break the rules. They weren't going to break the rules by helping this guy. He wasn't all dead. He wasn't even mostly dead. He was only half dead, whatever that means. They could have helped him. They could have shown compassion. But rules sometimes are convenient places for us to hide. Rules are sometimes convenient ways for us to hide from the opportunity to show love and care and serve. The opportunity to demonstrate compassion. And people who, particularly the religious, we can be really good at that. They held back, and so they went right past. And I'll say, when we need compassion and we're too proud to receive it, we use rules to hold that back from ourselves. That vulnerable person over there, or the vulnerability in me, is a test of my understanding of compassion. Am I going to hide behind the rules? Are you going to hide behind the rules? Are you going to hide behind some sort of false idea of there's deserving poor, or like, hey, he deserved this thing? Really? Because they won't pass the test of compassion. Vulnerable people, they test our love of compassion. The second test of this is it tests our humility. Because watch what happens. The priest goes by, the Levite goes by, and you know who shows up? You know who shows up and helps the person? A Samaritan. Now you have to understand, if you know the story well, that Jews and Samaritans, they hated each other at a level that we don't even understand. I mean, we know division these days. You know what Twitter and social media is like, and how people throw barbs at each other? Like, that's standard fare back then. And so their political enemy, their spiritual enemy, their geographic enemy comes in, and Jesus has the gall to use that person to be the hero of the story. It's humbling to see other people suffer. It's humbling to see other people suffer because oftentimes it exposes our lack of answers. And it makes us uncomfortable between maybe the gap between us and them, or if we're suffering between us and others. It creates this gap that is uncomfortable, and it leaves us to simplistic answers. Oh, this is the reason why. It's this. It's this. Or they're one of those people, and that's why. Or he was a fool. That's why. We become prone to simplistic answers, and our lack of humility makes us say like, oh, I got it. It's just a simplistic thing. And I know the answer. I know why it is. And what it's really doing is we're using the simplistic answer to satisfy that discomfort inside of us that's exposed when we see the sufferings of others. I've mentioned this before. Somewhere in your psychology studies you may have come across this. It's called the fundamental attribution error. So the fundamental attribution error is to attribute other person's sufferings and difficulties to their character, while at the same time, sometimes even in the same sentence, attribute our sufferings and our difficulties to our circumstances. It happens almost all the time. I look at somebody else's messy desk and I say, oh man, what's wrong with them? And I go back to my messy desk. I'm like, I got so much going on, so much pressure. Will somebody help me? Right? And so we do this in small ways, but we do this in large ways. We do this as individuals. We find ourselves doing this as cultures. This eventually ends up when we feel the sufferings and then we feel the difficulties. It draws us to simplistic answers and to heroes that look like us. And it helps us to find enemies that don't look like us. And the simplest answers almost always have a simple person as the hero and has another kind of person or another individual person as the enemy. And when we can simplify it to a hero and an enemy, that feels good. You can make a movie in 2 hours. You can have all the problems and everything get better, and that feels better. And Jesus is not nearly that simplistic or naive. And following him will not mean following those kind of naive ways. It tests the suffering of others and the vulnerability of others. It tests our ability to sit with difficulties, to sit with pain, and to expose ourselves to maybe our own difficulty and pain. It tests our willingness to trust God with the difficulties of others. There's 2 other tests that I'll go real quickly through. There's the test of boundaries. So the Samaritan jumps in and he bandages up the guy, brings him over to the inn, gives the guy a little bit of money, and says, "Hey, I got stuff to do. I'm going to move on." One pastor says, clearly he was a good Samaritan, not a great Samaritan. He just moved on. But a lot of us, when we think of someone who's vulnerable, and this is really practical, we don't want to get involved with vulnerable people because we feel like we'll get swallowed up in their problems. Well, who's the fragile person if you don't know how to say no, right? It tests our boundaries. We can help somebody. We don't have to save anybody. We don't have to rescue people. And this goes both ways. When you need help from someone, you don't need them to rescue you or save you, but sometimes you just need to help get over a bump. And oftentimes, our unwillingness to ask for help is because we won't break it up and ask for something small. Our unwillingness to help is that we're unwilling to think about it carefully enough to just give a little bit of help. It tests our sense of boundaries, our sense of self, our sense of okay, who's in control of this? If God can help everyone, he can use me to help a little or a lot, but I can say no. It tests our boundaries. It also tests our generosity. In that day, the Samaritan spent a lot of money. He spent a lot of money on this person who was hurting. And it might have been this guy's fault. It might not have been this guy's fault. We don't know. But he spent a lot of money on him. And the sufferings of others and particularly our opportunity to give to that, makes us reflect on what we have. And it tests the way we hold on to what we have. There's some academic research being done right now about how people view money, and it's in very different ways than, say, animals. And they're trying to understand some of the biological dynamics around it, and some things are falling apart. Because most typical animals use things as tools, and money, when it's used as a tool, helps get things done. But for some reason, that which works for, you say, animals when it comes to tools, it has a limitation when it comes to humans. Because humans don't simply use money as a tool. The only other analogy they have is that money is a drug. And we get bound to it and we get addicted to it. We need to hold on to it, and it holds on to us. I know for me, I like having tools. I love using tools, and I particularly like using tools for other people. I don't know what it is. It's like I like to get tools, and I like to be able to help others. And I hope that's the way money is for you. I hope that you look forward to making more money so you can help more people, so you can solve more problems. You can make more of a difference in this world. If not, it probably means that money's no longer a tool for you. And if you want to grow in that area, 938 is a great place to be. I can tell you right now names, and several names of people who have been generous towards other people in the thousands. And I'm just saying within the last weeks and month, within our church, who have gathered their money and they look for opportunities. I can tell you names of people who have given hours of their life of service, thousands of dollars of service time towards others, just because they love to serve and they love to give. Their life and everything they have is a tool to be able to give to others, and it gives them joy and freedom to do this. You heard KG's story last week that it was just a $40 test. I've heard a couple stories of people who have given $40. Did you take the $40 test? I mean, can you use $40 as a tool to make somebody else's life better? Or just find a way to give somewhere? Because there's a lot of suffering in this world. There's a lot of vulnerability in this world. Will what you earn be a tool to make that better? Can you keep it just as a tool? Because abundance is a test. How will that go for you? And I'm just going to put one more test out there. I think that there's a test of our hearts right now in our country. And as a pastor, I think about this a lot. And I want you to know how I am praying for you. I believe that you can't go anywhere without feeling like you're in opposition to somebody else or somebody's in opposition to you, whether it's masks or schools, or there's so many things. It just feels like it's just tearing us apart. And I think it's really, really hard. And the truth is all of us are vulnerable in some ways. And I think that's going to be key to understanding how we get through this, how we can pass the test. I'm going to tell you how I think that we can pass the test of the unbelievable challenges we're going to face. But first, I want to let you know how you'll know when you pass it. The way we pass this test is that we become more humble, more compassionate, more gracious, more loving, more joyful through these trials. Do you believe that that can be true for you? I believe with all my being that you and me and all of us can become more loving 3 months from now than we are now. We can be more generous than we are 3 months from now. We can be more compassionate. We can be more like Jesus. These are the trials that could make us, but they could also break us. And it's going to come down to some decisions. And I want to walk you through how I think that's going to go for us. Okay, so our goal is to grow in our sense of love, joy, peace, and patience, and kindness towards others. That's our goal, right? Here's the test, right? So we have a divide. And we're feeling the divide right here. And I believe there's a fork in the road, particularly for us, particularly for Christians right now. We are feeling so much pressure in so many ways. And I want to show basically two paths. Jesus talks about the wide path and the narrow path. I particularly think this is, if you're checking out the faith, sit back and watch. I'm particularly talking to those who go to church, call themselves Christians. There's the Churchman Road right here. This is for people who church was their faith. Going to church was how faith worked. And faith was about getting there and getting something when you go there and then moving on. But we don't have a place to show up on Sunday mornings. We don't have a place to go. And so if your faith was built around a weekly event, your faith is going to fade. And here's the deal. 30% of folks who used to go to church are not going to church anymore. They're going down Churchman Road. And here's, if you're not going to church and you're feeling all this pressure in the world, if you don't have things in your life to remind yourself of what is true, you're going to get easy answers put in front of you. And you're going to be vulnerable to easy answers. Those easy answers aren't going to work, and so you're going to find yourself with more anger, more disappointment. You're going to find yourself You're going to find yourself growing in resentment. Rather than growing in love, joy, and peace, you're going to find more anger and resentment in your life. You're going to find more isolation. Why? Because you're all by yourself in your faith. Because you're not connected. And here's what I'm most concerned about. You're going to give yourself over to escapist hopes of either romantic, political, or celebrity heroes to rescue you from the pain of having to live in this world over here. And the life of love, joy, peace that God offers you, you start missing out on it. Now, you might think I'm going to say this narrow path over here is about going to church and attending and going to 9:38 online. It's not. It's not. Attendance isn't really going to be the deal. If your goal is to simply attend, you'll get there on occasion. The real difference between people who are going to thrive and grow in this and those who are going to just kind of peter out into mediocrity is about engagement. What is church to you? What is your faith to you? Is it about showing up once a week and getting something? Well, You can Netflix with us as much as you like, and if you're kind of working at it, you'll do that, but just try, it's hard to compete with Netflix. If your faith is about going to church, I'm sorry, it's going to be a while for you before it's normal again. But if it's a faith in Jesus, it's going to be about engagement. It's going to be about community. Building new friendships. It's going to be about service. It's going to be about giving. Giving your time, giving your resources, following Jesus down the path of sacrifice to make this world better. The path of Jesus begins with a cross. And unless you're willing to engage in his path, this is what you got. And I don't know what else to tell you. It's a narrow path of following Jesus. And you know what also is going to happen? Service, community giving. You engage, you'll start attending too. You know why? Because there's going to be a community that matters. There's a place where you're serving. There's a place where you're giving. It matters to you, and you're going to attend not because you're a churchman. You're going to attend because you're engaged, and actually because you're engaged, you're facing all sorts of new challenges of how you're giving, you're serving, and you're going to need to get filled up again, and you're going to need it, and you're going to need more of it. Here's my challenge to you. Over the next month, we're going to come up with ways to give you opportunities to engage. Over the next 4 to 6 weeks, we're going to continue to bring you opportunities to engage. Can I challenge you to say yes? Say yes to the narrow path of Jesus. And it might be opportunities we put in front of you, maybe opportunities other people, or just the vulnerable people in your life put in front of you. Can I challenge you to say yes to engagement? We have an opportunity next week to gather together and worship all together. And we want you to be there. And if you feel safe and you're ready to be a part of public worship, man, we want you there. But can I encourage you, don't just come to get something. Come to give. Bring people. Find somebody in church that you know, and make sure your friend is going to be there. If you haven't seen your friend in a while from church, call them, text them. Make sure they're going to be there. Go to give. Go to present yourself to God and give yourself to other people. Find somebody who might be vulnerable. Find somebody who might not show up. Find somebody who may have slipped through the cracks and make sure they get there. Engage your faith when we come together. Don't make it just about showing up. Make it an opportunity to give something to the community of God, to give something to our community by making our church better, to give something to God as you show up and face all the different things that you might face to get there, and celebrate that, Jesus is going to be with us on that narrow road. It makes me think of one other road that just kind of comes to my mind. I think I've shared this before. There's this U2 song called Cedarwood Road, and it's a song about Bono and his hometown. And he grew up on Cedarwood Road. And that's where he meets the edge. And it's the story of growing up. It's the story of all these challenges he faces along the way. And he ends the song with this kind of cryptic summary. The heart that is broken is the heart that is open. And that's a really good picture of the Jesus we follow. He took the road of the cross with a broken heart, an open heart that continued to love everyone, even those who were nailing him to the cross. He continued to pray for them. His heart was broken. His heart was open. It's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard, but can I call you to the narrow road of a broken heart, the broken road with an open heart that continues to pour itself out for others, an open heart that continues to open itself up to God, say, I need you, an open heart that continues to go to brothers and sisters to get the support we need to live on this path. My pastoral heart says, don't allow yourself to be hardened by the anger and the hate and the resentment and the simplistic, easy answers of the broad road. Take that narrow road Yes, with a broken heart, but an open heart that pours itself out for others and lives for God. Let's do that. God, this story comes together for me really well when I recognize that I am that man on the side of the road. I'm the man on the side of the road, whether by my sins and my foolishness and all of them put together, I've walked down a Jericho road of despair away from you. And Jesus, you're the true Samaritan. You're the great Samaritan that's come for me. You're the great Samaritan that's come for all of us. God, help us to recognize in Jesus the one that finds us in our vulnerability, that shows care and compassion to us, even in our anger, even in our resentment, even in our self-pity, even in our wandering. Jesus, you're the great Samaritan. You come, you look after us, you care. And may we be filled with your great love and care as we open our hearts to you, that we may live our lives with open hearts towards others. In your name we pray. Amen.